Across the globe, this is a uniquely challenging moment. An opportunity to reimagine and rebuild the systems in which we live. Communities are hard at work to recover, and at Polar Bears International, we are inspired by the ways people around the world are caring for one another right now.
And we're committed to doing our part to support you.
So we'll be coming to you live from our homes across the globe, offering our annual Fall Tender Connections program. We have sessions dedicated to students of all ages, but our live broadcasts are available for anyone to enjoy.
Oh, hi! If you're a kid like me, go to Tundra Connections to learn all about polar bears and their favorite food, seals!
Buggy One will still be bringing you polar bears live from the tundra. Our team of familiar faces will use innovative software to continue to connect with you, at home, in the classroom, or wherever you may be. Join us for a lighthearted live chat, an educational webcast, or just zen out with the live cams.
Participate in conversations with scientists and take a deep dive into the world of polar bear research and policy. Ask your questions directly and learn from the experts.
Although we are physically distant, we can continue to find ways to be socially connected and come together with our friends, families, and communities.
We hope you'll join us to follow your curiosity and to find a little Arctic inspiration through virtual windows into the polar bear's world.
Hello and welcome to Polar Bears International's Tundra Connection series. I'm BJ Kirschhoffer and I'm the Director of Field Operations for Polar Bears International. Across the globe, this is a uniquely challenging moment. We're inspired by the ways people around the world are caring for one another right now, and we are committed to doing our small part to support you. We usually offer Tundra Connections from Buggy One on the shores of Hudson Bay, but of course this year things look just a little bit different. We still have our live cams from Churchill to mix into the webcast, but you might see our staff and guests in the comfort of their own homes. This content today is catered to kids, but anybody can participate, and we hope to provide you with a window into the Arctic for all that those are interested in polar bears from anywhere. So during today's live event, we're going to talk a little bit about polar bears and how we use incredible technology to learn about them. This program will last about 20 to 30 minutes, including time for questions. During the broadcast today, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat window below, or you can send them in to questions@pbears.org. Today, I am very happy to be joined by Joanna Sulich. She is in Tromsø, Norway, and I've had the pleasure of working with Joanna when studying maternal dens over in Svalbard over the past several years. So Joanna, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the world of polar bears?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for having me here, and hello to everyone watching. My name is Joanna Sulich, and I'm a biologist, and I study behavior of animals. So I studied different animals when I started my career, and I used technology throughout that process as well. I looked at birds, I looked at larger animals like wolves or brown bears, but eventually I studied polar bears and time when they go into dens and they raise their babies. So I looked into maternity denning of polar bears in Svalbard throughout my master at the Norwegian Polar Institute here in Tromsø, in the very far north of Norway. And I am involved with Polar Bears International on a project that looks at the same time period in polar bears' life, but we are using cameras that are set in front of polar bears' dens to have a look at the first time where bears are emerging from the den and in this vast and cold environment of the Arctic. So yeah, that's how I ended up meeting BJ and Megan Owen, who's not here today, but she's also involved in the project. And that's why I'm here.
So maybe we should help people understand a little bit more about polar bears, and then we can dive into the technology side of things.
Sure.
But where do polar bears live on this planet? And maybe you could tell us why they live there.
Yeah, sure. Polar bear's habitat is extremely remote when we talk like from our perspective as humans. So polar bears live all across the Arctic, so in the northern area of the planet, and they are heavily dependent on the sea ice. They use sea ice as their like platform to feed on seals. That's their primarily food source. So they're truly bound to a place where the weather is cold enough so the sea ice freezes and they can venture out and find their food source. They can travel from one place to another. They can find each other in order to mate. And yeah, they can find seals like the one on the picture where they are sniffing their prey with their extraordinary noses and maneuvering through this extremely mobile environment of a sea ice because it's not attached to anything. The sea ice drifts with currents and is pushed by winds as well. So it's not only very remote, it's far away, but also it's extraordinarily challenging for humans to maneuver. As you can see, there's so many wet patches in the ice that we see on the picture. Bears have very well adapted paws and they are extraordinary swimmers, but for humans, those environments are just unreachable. So it's not only the bears live in like those vast areas and they're white in the white landscape, they also maneuver through environments that we simply cannot reach. And there's just so few of them in this massive landscape that we truly depend on technology in order to get information that is like the basic information about their life. That's really a key tool for understanding their life history and their habits and their condition at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, we saw some video there of the picture of the kind of northern perspective of the globe and the ice forming in the cold months and then melting away in the warmer months. And this is what makes polar bears hard to study. I think you had mentioned there. It is such a big place, isn't it? It's a huge place, and it's not. People aren't built for this place. Polar bears are built for this place.
No.
Is that right?
Yes. So the place, the polar bears are extraordinarily adapted to survive in this environment. They have thick fur and also that masks them very well within the environment. They have powerful white paws with which they can navigate the landscape, but they can swim very efficiently. They're very good hunters. They're also very adaptable and very smart in the way they navigate. But for us humans, it's simply, well, it's either very difficult to organize way to get there, or also it's simply dangerous to be out there. So in order for us to know where the polar bears go, we need to find tools that allow us to kind of sit on polar bear's back and ride with it as it goes on its own adventures on the sea ice.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy. I do want to say that there are people groups, of course, that live all around the Arctic, in all of the countries that surround the North, and some of these people they do spend time on the ice or on the water, but nobody spends as much time on the ice as the polar bear does. This is an animal that is uniquely created for this environment, to be able to roam around. And really, if it had its choice, they maybe would never come to land. If there was enough ice some populations of bears might just stay out there forever because they can do all the things that they need to do. They could find their mates, they could have their young, and they can find their food. So pretty unique place. But I think that does kind of, bode to why they are so hard to study, because they are in this super remote spot. So historically, how did scientists study some of these bears? You spent some time in Svalbard, and people have had a history there. How did the early people there in Svalbard study polar bears?
So Svalbard is a particular place, or it's curious in its regard that it had no native population. So when you mention about people living all across the Arctic, like in Svalbard, that is north of Norway, there was no native population. And of course, one of information of gaining knowledge is talking to people who live among bears, and having interviews with people who are native to the area is an excellent source of information that is very important. But in Svalbard, it looks a little bit different. So there were no people living in Svalbard, and when Svalbard was discovered, it was quickly considered a huge resource in terms of trapping and hunting. So in early days, there would be people setting up north to hunt as many animals as they could. And these were the people who would be observing animals roam through this ecosystem. And they would be recording it in their journals. And those observations are one of the first observations available. So whalers or trappers are the people who had first encountered polar bears and reported it in Svalbard area. And later on, when the scientists started to be present there and be much more interested in conservation as well, and the law shifted as well, so polar bears became protected species, and much more focus was put on looking at the bears. And it was very challenging. The technology that we nowadays that's present in our computers or in our mobile phones, it was simply not there. People were relying on their binoculars and on their skis, so they would venture out and do surveys by skiing around and trying to find any signs of activity of a bear, so tracks, or maybe bear itself, or maybe a place where they could see that the bear was eating a seal. And these were the first observations. Later on, they would also, if it was possible, there were areas where polar bears would appear in higher density. So when there would be more of them, maybe around an interesting food source, or if they were waiting for the ice to freeze before they go out and look for food in late summer, then they would give scientists an opportunity to find a nice viewing point. And you have examples of such towers in North America, where they could just sit comfortably on top. Well, we can talk about comfort on such places, but they would place themselves somewhere where the view is good and just observe and note down what they see. And when I was looking for information about maternity denning for my master thesis, I reached out to one of the researchers that had worked on this subject in Svalbard. And he told me, it was Mitch Taylor, who remembered and shared with me an anecdote where he was lucky enough to spend a spring on Kongsøy Island, which was a island full of bears raising their cubs there. And he spent entire spring in the trapper's cabin when he was observing mothers and families emerging from the den. Now times have changed, but observations still remained a non-invasive and extremely important method of getting to know the animals that we study.
Yeah, I think this is important because, people were still making notes and observing animals in a place where it's still relatively comfortable for people to be, relatively safe. Maybe you're in a cabin, maybe you're on skis near the sea ice, but to really see where the polar bears go and what they do, there was still a human presence there. So the jump to technology was was really pretty important and is important for polar bear research, because we can see what happens when they do leave our view. Yeah, I think that, I mean, I would love to go back to the days of being able to maybe ski at Kongsoya. That sounds very neat, to be able to see so many polar bear dens all in one place. Unfortunately, it doesn't sound like that happens much anymore because of sea ice loss. But how amazing to be able to see so many bears in one place as the scientists did not too long ago. We have some good questions coming in here. First one is, why are polar bears white? This is from Tracy.
Oh, so well, I think the simple answer to this, the polar bears are white and not to be seen. So they are hunters, and their hunting success basically defines their livelihood. So if they can only make it if they get the food they need, and it's not easy. They are extraordinarily good at that, but also they are adapted to blend with an environment as well as possible. So I think the simple answer to that is that they want to remain invisible to seals or animals that they hunt when they are sneak to them.
That's good. And another question here, we keep mentioning buggy 1. We've mentioned it in this broadcast and other ones. Is there a buggy 2, 3, and 4? I will take that one. You know, buggy 1, where the live cams are, if you've been watching the explore.org live cams, here's a picture of buggy 1 here. This is actually the bones, the original tundra buggy for the Churchill area. These are tourist vehicles that take people out to see polar bears in relative comfort. I mean, you're inside, it's nice and heated, and they serve lunch and snacks, and you get to hang out with polar bears for a day or multiple days. So it's a wonderful experience. This one here, Frontiers North Adventures, the owner of the Tundra Buggies, has donated this vehicle to us in order to attach the live cam as well as do this education program from. So, so this is one of many buggies. I believe they have a total of 12 permits to operate. They have buggies that number up to 17, although they have skipped a few as they've retired a few models. But yes, that is a good question. I think that's the first time someone's asked that, but yes, there are other buggies, and sometimes you see them on the cameras. Good questions. So, how has technology allowed us to better understand polar bears?
I think one of the major breakthroughs that really allowed us to understand where bears go was the use of GPS technology. And you may know GPS from whenever you try to get somewhere with a car, or now it's also on phone. So it is a tool that, using satellites that are circling around the Earth, is able to pinpoint a location of a device to extraordinary accuracy nowadays. So those devices can be integrated with collars that are put on polar bears and programmed in a way that they text the researcher every 2 hours or so, that can be set, about their position. So we know where bears are in space, when even though we're not with them, we can sit in the comfort of our own home, and the bear, who seems enjoying its time right there, wearing the collar, is going around and just like texts researchers when it's on its way. And knowing knowing the time that has passed between the locations, and knowing the locations, we can also calculate the speed and the direction in which the bear is going. And that tells us a lot about the activity of the bear as well, or how fast it's moving, or whether it's using a lot of energy or just standing in one place. So GPS is definitely a massive breakthrough. But those collars that we saw in the video, they're also fitted with other devices, other sensors. So BJ is holding one right there. So They have a battery that allows the device to work for some time, up to several years, despite the cold. And those collars are fitted with different sensors that don't only collect information about the position of the bear, but also can tell us a bit about the activity of a bear. So how much the bear is moving, or its body and its head. So of course, if the bear is running, it's going to send us information if the bear is just sitting still. And that also can tell us a lot about how much energy is the bear using when it's traveling through the landscape. Or hunting or going about its life. And another device that I think it's quite important when looking at polar bear habits and polar bear's life is also a sensor that allows us to understand whether bear is in water or outside of the water. And that's been very handy. Bless you there. That's been very handy where now when we see that the ice extent is shrinking, we can also see that, for example, bears are proportionally spending more time in water because there is an information sent that tells us that the bear is swimming at the moment. And these information have their own consequences because the swimming, it's much more energy costly than walking. So in order to if a bear eats a seal, it's going to last for a long time of walking, but just a little shorter time of swimming, if you know what I mean. So these are some of the basic devices that are on the collar. But what's happening now is that the cameras are becoming a much more available tool and their battery lasts much longer. So we can spy a bit more on polar bear habits and get our eyes in their environment as well. And the cameras that we're working with are the cameras that we set in front of polar bear dens, where we know the bear is already sitting. So we kind of film the camera is set outside. But there are also cameras that can be placed on the collar. So they are recording material where the bear is going around, and we can see what it eats and what it pays attention to. So it's really extraordinarily intimate view of polar bear's life. And also personally, I find it so exciting. And it really is thrilling to be able to just hang under the chin of a polar bear and look at this landscape through its eyes. This is also giving perspective that I think feeds not only the science, but also the spirit when we think of those animals.
Yeah, I think this is pretty interesting. You know, the GPS was a huge breakthrough for, as you described, kind of understanding where polar bears go, where they use the habitat, what ice they're on, and like you say, the water sensor, us being able to understand how much time are they spending in the water, because of course that is much more energy intensive to swim than it is to just walk. So some really interesting stuff. But I think the camera I think we saw some surprising things on there. As in, you know, we only collar, scientists really only collar a very, very small percentage of bears. And so we know where a few individuals are, but the camera showed us that sometimes bears do interact out there, outside of mating season, out on the sea ice. They just maybe bump into each other out there, which is so interesting. You know, here's this massive landscape, and still they maybe kind of meet up with their friends. Maybe they're not friends, I don't know, but you know, they're meeting up with each other. We can see how many times they're attempting to hunt for seals and how many times they're successful versus how many times they've failed. Some really interesting pieces of information can be gathered from cameras like this, the kind of bear's eye view or bear's chin view that we're getting to enjoy here. Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah,
also,
and I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No,
I
go
was
for
thinking that another like a great asset to having a camera as well, that it allows us to actually calibrate the tools that we already have, that they're giving us a vague view of what may be going on, but if we actually have an insight with exactly the action that's been happening, then we can find its signature within the data that we're collecting and then match it to the activity that we're observing. So there's definitely strong reinforcement of the technologies when combined together.
Yeah, and this could be thought of almost like a Fitbit. The Fitbit that maybe you have in your you wear on your wrist, maybe your parents have, maybe even the accelerometers built into our phones that tell us how many steps we've taken. You know, the phone doesn't actually know how many steps you've taken. It's just using data from the sensors within the phone to estimate how long we've been walking for based upon the movement of the phone itself. And so, you know, of course, scientists that developed the phones spent a lot of time training the phone to understand what walking looks like versus running versus maybe some of the other activities. For us in polar bears, it's the same. You know, we need to be able to watch the polar bear do these things with the collar on in order to understand what the sensors, what these accelerometer sensors are picking up. And that for us means that the hard work has to be done by cameras. And so some of that could be done by maybe the collar camera, but also, as Joanna has mentioned, we put cameras in front of dens. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that, the things that we see on these cameras that we put in front of dens.
Yeah, so we talked a bit about how difficult it is to study bears when they are out there in the landscape, but maternity den is even like harder of a riddle because bears, when they are giving birth to their young, they're going under the snow. So it's really hard to know how the first minutes outside of this den look like for the bears. What kind of environment are they in? What decides about the time that they find it to be suitable to introduce the precious cubs to the world? And where do they go? And how do they behave? Do they stay around the den and just hang out and adapt a little bit outside and then go back into the den to nap a little more? Or are they just going outside and smelling the seals and the sea ice and just darting outside? Here you can see a dot of a bear just coming outside of her den with a family, and then just relaxing a little bit to the left of the initial den. So this is also a very interesting observation when we see that the bears take their time as well, and maybe they're waiting for the right conditions, and maybe they're just still waiting with their cubs in the safety of their environment. There's a lower chance of meeting some other bears, and there's a moment when they sniff that it's right, or in some other way they understand that this is the moment, and they venture out with the cubs onto the sea ice to hunt seals and regain the energy that they had lost in the maternity den.
We got some other really good questions coming in here. Mach 747's asking, other than tracking movements, what other data does the collar capture? How about heartbeat or sounds? Anything else?
Yeah, this is a really good question because of course, people try to get as creative as possible. So they're putting a song meter or a microphone on the collar and recording the sounds that bears make is absolutely possible and has been done. If I'm not mistaken, Megan Owen was doing that as well in San Diego Zoo, and she was putting microphones on collars of mothers that were in den, so she can hear really the snoring or crying or the eating noises of polar bears in the den, and it's giving us extraordinary view on very detailed behavior and also even language of polar bears. There are some sensors that are allowing us to measure temperature as well. So you can, and because it's so close to the bear, then it really measures the temperature of the bear and around it. And I don't know, BJ, do you know of any other devices or sensors that are placed on collars?
There are temperature sensors on the collars. That's one of the data streams that maybe help us figure out if bears are in the den or out. Just being able to kind of understand the relative temperature around the collars themselves. There could be a variety of different transmitters on the collars. They could have a GPS transmitter. There's also you could have a VHF transmitter to allow us to maybe find a collar that's been dropped off. And this is kind of going into another question from Mox 747. And that is, is there a release or drop off for these collars? And do they ever get picked up by researchers? And the question is yes to both of them. There is an automatic release to these collars. This collar here that I showed actually doesn't have it, but the models in the wild, most do now have an automatic release here. And scientists can program what the date that they would like the collar to come off the bear, and it, as Joanna has said, could be 1 to 2 years, depending on how often the transmitters are pushing data up to the satellites. And ideally, we time the drop off to happen when the bears are on land, because the collar itself is quite expensive. These things can be $3,000 or more US dollars per collar. So, being able to retrieve it is a really efficient thing. And so oftentimes, well, sometimes anyways, scientists are able to go out and pick these up. There's also data that's stored within these collars, and we can extract more of it, more than what is just transmitted, if we can retrieve the device. So there is a pretty good reason to go out and go grab this stuff. I don't know, is there any other sensors that you know of there, Joanna, that are on the collars?
I think we covered them pretty well. But I'm sure that as technology develops as well, there is going to be just more possibilities out there. The things are going to have stronger battery. They're going to be so who knows what we're going to be using in some years to coming.
This is a really interesting one. Question here. What's the history of indigenous knowledge with this species, and does it relate to how science and polar bear is done, or maybe how we study polar bears? Maybe I think this is a tricky question, but how do we incorporate indigenous knowledge in science?
So there is I think, since I'm based on Svalbard and I work very little with, I don't work with indigenous population because there is simply nobody who's indigenous within the archipelago that I'm working on. I can only know the sources that are reaching towards me, and then the publications that I find. So the traditional knowledge surveys and interviews with people about historical distribution of bears and their habits, and the current observations, they allow scientists to compare how polar bears' activity had changed. And but maybe you have more detailed or a better view on this, since your work is based in North America, where I know and PBI also puts a lot of attention to this.
Yeah, there are projects that specifically do focus on working with the indigenous peoples to the area, either to look back on what knowledge that they have from the past, but also working with people to help gather data for current ongoing studies. And I think all of this is very important to understanding kind of the full picture of the North, and what's kind of what's happening up there, because it isn't just people, or sorry, just polar bears that live in the North. Of course, there's people that are living up there, and many of the same things that are affecting polar bears, loss of sea ice due to global climate change, is also affecting the people in the North. And so it's all one story up there, as it is worldwide. So these are really good questions coming in. There's a ask here about, technology getting smaller, and I do want to quick touch on this really quick. Yes, the larger sensor packages in the collars, we've been using these same collars for quite a while. But as many electronics have over the last whatever years, everything gets smaller and smaller. And so the same thing with transmitters I'm holding here this is an ear tag transmitter. This is how small some of the transmitters have gotten. Now the battery life isn't quite as long on this as the large collars, but because this thing is so small, we're able to put it on other animals other than just adult females. That's something we didn't mention earlier. Collars only go on adult females because males have fat necks and skinny heads, and the collars just fall right off. And so we understand quite well where females travel, but the males, subadults, other animals, there's a lot of questions that we could still answer by understanding where they go. And so these smaller transmitters could help. PBI is working on a project with 3M out of St. Paul, Minnesota, to figure out other ways to attach this to polar bears other than using an ear tag. So this would be, we're looking at ways of embedding this into the fur, almost like a burr would be stuck on your dog or other animals. So look for more of that here coming out soon, as we hope to have some news on exciting ways to attach smaller transmitters to polar bears. So let's see. I think we've got some. Oh, this is a good one. I think it's hard to. No, this is a good question here. How well, Joanna, how well can polar bears hear? Do you know this one?
This is a very good question, but and from what I know, it's not that well known. so I think the bears, you correct me here, if they can hear, like if we compare ourselves to bear and we use a human as a comparison, they can hear pretty well. But I don't think it's their primarily sense when maneuvering out in the Arctic.
Yeah, you're right on that one. We like to say that polar bears kind of live their life through their nose. Their eyes are a little better than ours in the dark. Their ears are actually about the same as ours, with a little greater sensitivity. I believe it is on the lower end. And it was Megan Owen and her colleagues at San Diego that did this work. They trained their bears at the facilities to take a hearing test, much like us. Very cool to see. The bears would react if they could hear the tones, the same tones that we would be played in a hearing test. So super cool work. And I think just one more example of just how smart and capable these animals are. So I guess, I think that's about it. I don't know, is there anything else that you'd like to share here as far as technology goes with polar bear research, Joanna?
Yeah, I think I would like to underline one side of using technology and studying animal behavior that is particularly important to me. And it is that we are able also, through the use of technology, get a lot of information while minimizing the impact on the animals. So by using the collars and by decreasing the size of transmitters that we put on animals, we can really decrease the pressure that we put on animals as scientists, and to see the technology support scientists in creating tools that are like maximizing the benefits by minimizing the impact that we have on bears and other animals that we study through technology. It's quite uplifting, and I think a lot of work is going that direction, and that's a very, very good side of using technology when observing animals from afar.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think two, if we can do things better, we should do things better. And I think that's an example here in the research world. I think that probably could be extended to how we live on this planet as well. There's a lot of really neat technologies out there that potentially could help us curb our greenhouse gas emissions. And that's the biggest threat facing polar bears is a warming climate and melting sea ice. And I think here in the research world, if we can improve things and still learn about animals and collect good information, but do it in a better way, we should. Same thing on this planet. If we can live here more efficiently, we should strive to do that. So, Joanna, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today, all the way from Tromsø. I can see there in the background, it is nighttime. It looks quite dark, although maybe nighttime lasts a long time there this time of year.
It is a polar night. Yes.
It is a polar night. Okay, so it is dark very often there. But I want to thank you so much for joining us on the webcast today. And I want to thank all the viewers too for joining us during this 2020 season from Churchill and around the world. This is our last webcast, but we do have one more final live chat on Thursday. So please stay tuned. We're going to be talking about some of the highlights seen on the bear cams throughout this last season, and it has been a good one. So please jump in there. We're going to be highlighting a lot of the snapshots and moments that you captured as viewers out on the bear cams. So thank you much for joining us today.
Thanks a lot.
And we hope you learned something new. Yeah, thanks so much, Joanna, for joining. It's really great to chat with you. And this is the end of our polar bear season here. Please do, though, stay tuned to our Cape cams as well as the Northern Lights cams. They'll be running through the springtime and the winter. There's, Northern Lights season is just getting ramped up since the ice is coming in and the darkness is coming in. So great time to look at that. If you're spending more time than usual at home or ready for some more virtual learning, please check out our discussions on Flipgrid. You can check out the Polar Bears International website for more on that. And thank you so much to Explore.org for helping us make this all happen, and to all the staff at PBI for coming together to make the TC Tundra Connections season what it was this last year. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Future generations of people and polar bears depend on the decisions and plans that we make today. The key to getting the climate back to functioning the way it should, and to preserving a future for polar bears across the Arctic, is to move away from using fossil fuels for energy altogether. The most important thing we can do is vote with the climate in mind to let our leaders know we support a swift transition to renewable energy sources. In the meantime, we can directly participate in and learn more about our local and regional renewable energy options. We can all make a difference outside our own households by influencing where our energy comes from. We hope you leave here feeling inspired and return home to leverage your voice and your influence, because together we can make sure that polar bears roam the Arctic sea ice for generations to come.